Hello everyone, what is happening? Great to see you guys today and welcome to today's video, and a big massive welcome to all new viewers. Today's video is Black-Eyed Children, urban legend or fact, you decide. Before we get into today's video, I just want to say a big massive thank you to everybody who is watching. This channel is now 222 subscribers strong. It means the absolute world to me. Thank you so much to everybody who is subscribing. Honestly, it makes one hell of a difference. And now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Right, now. One of the first questions we are asking at the minute is, what are black-eyed children? Black-eyed children seem to be quite a malevolent and evil being. The goal is to get invited into your home by acting scared and asking for help. Once they do that, if you ever make eye contact with them, you become ill and basically cursed. Victims have been known to end up with a sense of impending doom. There has also been quite a few stories, and one example of this is one that I found on the internet called Midnight Caller. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed with our 22-month-old daughter staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her 3 months and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything: our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but it's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared. And I figure it should work with the puppy too. I opened the door and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate, blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped toward me. And when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I couldn't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21. She looked to be 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long about mid-back with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's a popular thing right now, and a thin-looking olive-coloured pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around 3 or 4, in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a small stuffed toy under her arm, and it was identical to the one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. Something seemed off at this point. I hadn't made any noise, I hadn't shushed a dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators that I was at the front door. The older one spoke. She had the voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downwards, and I couldn't see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was no reason I couldn't see them through her bangs. They were black or midnight blue, or a dark purple. They were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things, as a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I had written off many a ghost story from friends and family members eager to tell me their tale. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalise my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door. Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Let us in. Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first she seemed polite. When I took the second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have broken in. I'll ask you again, may we come in your house and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward. Now something inside me seemed to be pulling me slowly back towards the door. It wasn't a physical pulling so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that BEKs can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I still fear I'll be an exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget it, but this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, this tells me otherwise. Tonight's second story is called The Bus Encounter. I was riding the bus back home after work. It was about 1 a.m. I am a security guard and often work odd hours, so I'm sitting there, and this guy gets on, sits across from me. He was wearing a suit, had a briefcase, regular looking guy in his 20s. What struck me about him at first was that he was chewing a cigar, yet not smoking it. You can't smoke on the bus, so I was looking at him while I stared out the window and chewed his cigar. All of a sudden, he turned and looked at me. His eyes were pitch black, just as you described, and I felt my fear rising. I was starting to panic, and I had no idea why. I was just panting, terrified of this guy. Then he grinned at me, and all his teeth were covered in tobacco bits with brown juice. The cigar clamped between them. I almost screamed, but instead I had the presence of the mind just to get up and take a seat right behind the driver. I calmed down a bit after that, but I kept an eye on the guy. He ended up chatting with some girl that got on, and they were still talking when I got off. I later convinced myself he was just trolling me, having fun with a pair of contacts. Now I wonder. Tonight's third story is titled Halloween. So it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighbourhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours and have a constant parade at our door. That night I'd say we'd had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30 p.m. and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween and all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn off the porch light and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out to play with all the kids, and I don't want to have to chase her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids. She would look a little intimidating to the younger kids. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was a Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean that those shows don't freak me out a bit, and being alone watching now, I'd have to say I was kind of on edge, as it were. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on. There came a light knock 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 at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell? Really? It's almost 10, go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark and without the porch light, it would be extra obvious to anyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room watching TV. It would have been pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, 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 again from the front door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room better and found her crouching by the back door like she was wanting out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her. Chloe, crate, I said. She just turned back to look at me like, hell no, lady, I ain't moving. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple of my neighbours on their way back home, that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself as she just sat there. I turned on the light when I got to the door, and sure enough I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. Also, no customary trick or treat either. I began to feel uneasy again. It was a girl and boy. The girl to my left was older, I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from high above and on columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say 8 or 9, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we come inside and use your phone to call our mum?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. I couldn't remember the last time I had anybody ask to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mum on?" I asked. This was when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another like they were going to say something to one another, but never spoke. They turned back to me and said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here and my brother is scared." I have to admit there were 2 competing feelings going on inside of me. The first, that of a mother's heart wanted to help these 2 small children get to their mum. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during a short conversation I'd already opened up the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they again looked at one another. A short moment they turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mum?" And with that statement, the little girl moved closer towards the door, like she was just going to walk on in by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone, replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and back standing to attention. I closed the door where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped again and pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when fear took over and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mum if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. but I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them stand there on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part of me didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to not know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but probably only a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbour that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to my phone, I glanced at the back door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got to my phone and started to look for his contact info, it was only then the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbour. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbour under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff and have never heard about the black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think is these kids were just out yanking on people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them: they were good, really good at it. They scared the hell out of me and my dog. And that concludes today's video. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and as I said before, fact or fiction, you decide. Take care, bright blessings, blessed be, and where you can be anything at all, then be kind, because being kind is the most beautiful type of person that you can be. And one more thing, don't have nightmares. Take care. Namaste.